Hello everyone, it's time to talk about Animal Farm. It's time to talk about Animal Farm, a social satire, and in this presentation we're going to talk about it in those terms. You've been through some videos, you've read the book, you've watched the movie, the animated movie probably, and now we're going to do an overview. So you've read the book, and hopefully you've read Writing Essays About Literature, Chapter 4, Research About Social and Historical Context. You can see why one reason that I chose this book to do is that we can look at social and historical context with it. They're perfectly applicable, and we can spread out from there and discuss how literature depicts did you hear my dog groan there? She's in on it too. How literature depicts people and critiques human flaws in society. Hopefully you've watched the animated 1954 film. Don't watch the 1999 live action version. It's terrible. And you've had the discussion part 2 of Animal Farm, in which you should be or should have contributed some research, and then also a quiz based on 2 videos, and including some questions you can find answers to on Shmoop, and I included a link there. So I've also posted an optional discussion. As we start into paper 2, I want to invite you to share research. If you share some and borrow from someone else's research, it needs to be back and forth. Don't just don't use someone's research without sharing some of your own, please, so that we can pool our work and learn about where we can get things, as well as learn from those resources. So you've learned that historical and social contexts are slightly different. That little video you listened to or watched by the 2 Australian teachers, I thought was very valuable. I thought it was very effective, and they distinguished between historical and social by saying that historical involves the events and what happened, the things that took place, the events. The social context is how the events affected people. So we can see things slightly different. You've already used reference tools to dig into topics, and now I'm going to encourage you to do that. I'm going to show you some definitions that I went after and found, and these are easy to find. I just went to the library online research portal, went down to L, I think. So it was Credo Literary Reference, I think is what I used, but it's Credo, and I just did a basic search and typed in these terms and came up with a number of resources mainly from different encyclopedias and dictionaries. Different types, you'll see that there are lots. They're sociological, they're political science, literary, different types of resources. And so I read through a number of definitions for each term, and I chose the one that I thought was most useful for this context to offer you. I didn't want to go off on tangents about literary or political theory. I wanted what would apply in this context. So when you see definitions, you get to choose what you're going to use if you use a definition in your paper. And often in papers, as you move ahead in your coursework, you will have to define terms. That's one of the basics of communicating. What are we talking about? Let's make sure we all have the same definition of whatever it is. So let's go into some definitions. Allegory, I've got this definition from a pretty basic book, 100 Ideas That Changed Art. Allegory is based on the personification of abstract concepts such as time, beauty, or freedom. It allows ideas to assume visible form and dramatizes the relationship between them. Okay, this picture is a famous picture, and I don't even remember what it is. It's a woman who often symbolizes something, and she's holding a horn of plenty, pouring out food for the animals all around her. And you see that a crown has fallen. This must be about the French Revolution or something. So allegory, in allegory, one thing stands for something that's probably an abstract idea. So in Animal Farm, you have the cowshed, Battle of the Cowshed, which represents the Russian Revolution, something different, something other, an historical event, and the characters stand for something else. Okay, this is satire. Satire is both a mode and a genre of verse and prose literature that adopts a critical attitude toward its target with the goal of censuring human folly. That uses some big words to say its goal is to punish flaws or faults. It's to make fun of people and things, and to point out what somebody's doing wrong. Okay, this cartoon is very old, and it shows Britain on the left and France on the right, the little guy who stands for Napoleon, carving up the world. That they were competitors, but they each took part of the world, way back in the 18th century. And there are lots of political cartoons that are satirical. So that came from the Princeton Handbook of Poetic Terms. So I used that dictionary because we're talking about literature rather than some other application. So satire in Animal Farm points out problems. And George Orwell's purpose was to point out problems in the Soviet Union, particularly with Stalin. But he does satirize other things too, and satire was alive and well in the 20th century. World War I was a mess, created terrible suffering, and resulted in great confusion. Mechanized warfare, which became common then, destroyed many lives for very little purpose. World War II saw the internment and decimation of a race. Nazism was part of that. Stalin, and he's the figurehead that Orwell takes aim at. Nuclear proliferation, and so forth and so on, all through the 20th century. It was an age of tremendous destruction and decimation because of leaders who had such power. So is Animal Farm only about the USS under Stalin? It doesn't only take aim at Soviet communism. As I said, the 20th century was an age of totalitarianism in which propaganda, and we see propaganda made fun of in this book, became a thing. Mass communication. The abuse of trust in leaders is a topic. Manipulation of the people by leaders. Violence, using violence to control masses of people. Unquestioning obedience. The role of education and importance of education, and how easy it is to use education to brainwash and control the population. And what about critical thinking? Critical thinking is something that we are aiming for. So another definition, totalitarianism. is a modern autocratic government in which the state involves itself in all facets of society, including the daily life of its citizens. The reason I bring this up is to ask, did communism have a corner on totalitarianism? Soviet communism, I should say, is a left-wing government the only type of government that could turn to totalitarianism? So if your answer is no, that others could, then keep thinking. What do you see in the 21st century? Are there totalitarian regimes, leaderships, in ostensibly democratic states? How do the categories and behaviors of Animal Farm apply to people, maybe politically, maybe just socially? We can dial it back. We don't have to be political as we look at this. We can, and it's obvious, and Orwell was certainly political and had a political purpose. But one of the reasons that this work endures is that it's about more than that. What leaders of organizations, institutions, governments fit the profiles of the pigs? And what other categories of people do you see in the work? Do we see ourselves, our own tendencies and general human follies? I'd like to suggest that yes, we do. And I'd like you to think about that. I hope you'll think about that as you explore what to write for paper number 2, and you look at that assignment. But one of those questions is to say, how does it work as satire if we take the context of Soviet communism out of the picture? Do you see any other people there? Okay, we're going to review the characters. My writers from my 01 section contributed most of these comments in a discussion about the different categories. So the people, we know that Farmer Jones represented Tsar Nicholas. Farmer Pilkington represented Britain or the U.S., who allied with the USSR in World War II. The competing totalitarian farmer Frederick looks like probably Germany at that time, and Mr. Whymper was Westerners, specifically capitalists, serving ruling communists and helping them with their goals, because that did happen. But what other people could you think of? People who want to be in control and will do whatever they need to do to get that control over other groups of people, in institutions, in social groups, societies. Who? So the sheep. Okay, Nene gave us this quotation. Now remember, we're looking for evidence from the text for any claims we might make about these groups. So the sheep, anytime she includes this quotation, anytime there was a disagreement, the sheep would break into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and everyone would go silent. So this is what their rule was, how one way Napoleon kept control. Whenever anyone would argue, he'd have them spout the motto over and over and over. The cows, we don't see a whole lot of the cows, but they did start the Battle of the Cowshed. They're large, capable beings, but they don't take a huge role. Here we have a quotation, one of the cows broke in the door of the store shed with her horns, and all the animals began to help themselves from the bins. They also, the other problem was that the cows hadn't been milked. So they needed someone to do that, and of course the pigs figured out how to milk the cows. Pigeons. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons whose instructions were to mingle with the animals on the neighboring farms, tell them the story of the rebellion, and teach them the tune of Beast of England. So Preston contributed that. So the ruling class led by Snowball and Napoleon, had messengers, and they were very important. Sorry, I keep counting. Very important. And so one of the goals of Soviet communism was to spread the revolution throughout the world. And you can see a parallel as well with advertisers and the spread of commercial power. The horses are probably one of my favorite characters. Well, two. There's Boxer and Clover. And of course, there's Molly, who doesn't stay very long. Caitlin gave us this example that he was the admiration of everyone, the hardest worker, and there are his mottos: I will work harder, and Napoleon is always right. And he was compassionate, didn't want to take a human life. And when he dies, Clover, I think that's when he dies, Clover begins to sing Beasts of England. So they were the hardest, especially Boxer, hardest workers on the farm. I don't have a quotation, a full quotation here, but the raven, who kind of comes and goes, represents the Russian Orthodox Church. He comes in and talks about Sugar Candy Mountain, where they're going to go one day and everyone is going to have enough and be happy, and it's pie in the sky by and by sort of thing. So his black feathers represent the black cassocks that the Russian Orthodox Church would wear. And eventually Stalin did make it up with the Russian Orthodox Church and brought them in on his side. He saw use for them. The cat. Last of all came the cat, who looked around. So the cat didn't listen to a word of what old Major was saying, but she's always kind of on both sides. She does this and that, completely unpredictable, completely unreliable. And I think some of us can relate to the cat. An interesting figure. I don't know that she parallels anyone directly, but I certainly know people like her. The dogs. In these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public, but spent all his time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce-looking dogs. I thought I had another quote about the dogs. Maybe I have another page on dogs and I don't remember it. The dogs directly represent a police group, a secret police group that that Stalin used to deal with his enemies, so to speak. A violent group of thugs, basically. So the pigs. Pigs were clever. They got all the best food. It was always the pigs that put forward the resolutions. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man and from man to pig and from pig to man again, but always it was impossible to say which was which. So they come to resemble humans in every detail. They turn into the thing that they hated. Okay, let's look at Snowball. So Snowball, we're tempted to really like Snowball because Snowball uses rational debate to persuade the other animals. He led in the Battle of the Cowshed, and you know that later Napoleon twists the information to say that he had actually instigated and was fighting against the animals. At the meetings, Snowball often won over the majority by his brilliant speeches. So, gift of rhetoric. Sometimes people who are very persuasive have good reasons. Sometimes they're simply manipulative. So he is an enemy in league with other traitors. Gracie pointed out that Squealer later, and at the direction of Napoleon, blames Snowball for everything. So Snowball becomes the enemy they can blame everything on. And of course, that's all made up. If you saw the animated film yet, you know the film shows Snowball having a different outcome, let's say, to Snowball leaving the farm than the book implies. So Napoleon. Napoleon and the animated film version depiction of Napoleon is interesting because you see that all along Napoleon is planning to selfishly take control of everything and plans and strategizes. When they'd finished their confession, the dogs promptly tore their throats out. And in a terrible voice, Napoleon demanded whether any other animal had anything to confess. Yes, Stalin forced confessions from people and then killed them anyway. The same happened in China during the Cultural Revolution. People were made to confess things sometimes that they never did, and then they were punished or killed for those things that they confessed. Austin says that the pigs just want all the power. The best example of this is Napoleon, how he changed how he was supposed to be called. He changed his name, to our leader, Comrade Napoleon. So he was the supreme person. Squealer. The animals were not certain what the words meant, but Squealer spoke so persuasively, and the 3 dogs who happened to be with him growled so threateningly that they accepted his explanation without further questions. So Squealer is the mouthpiece of the leadership of the pigs and uses whatever he can to manipulate and shape reality. Day and night we are watching over your welfare, he said. It is for your sake that we drink the milk and eat those apples. So you think, how could someone get away with that? Whereas in Soviet Russia, that is exactly the sort of thing that happened. Does it happen elsewhere? Do people in power tell us, I am enjoying every luxury because that's the best thing for you? How can a leader thrive and serve you if I don't enjoy this kind of treatment or food? So let's move on to the cartoon. Thinking about the cartoon, and an option will be for you to write a review of the cartoon for paper 2. What items or events are introduced or omitted in the cartoon that are maybe different from the book? How are characters depicted? Farmer Jones, Napoleon, Snowball Boxer, they might be perfectly in line with your imagination, but are they different? Are there details that the filmmaker adds or creates or includes that shape the way you see them or receive them? Are there emotional appeals in this film? Some people call it propaganda. Is it only emotional? What happens with the music? How does it change? How does it convey mood? Does it affect the emotional appeals? Light and dark? Are some things dark? Are some things light? How do those affect the scenes and how things change? Is there humor? Humor that wasn't in the book or humor that is in the book? And what is the pacing like? So consider the evidence. Our job is to look carefully and minutely at the text and make decisions and draw conclusions based on evidence from the text, or in the case of the film, the evidence on the screen. Are you interested in seeing real people in the animal categories and thinking about how these categories apply in your world, maybe to people around you? Can we see people like this every day? is there a warning in this for us? Even if we're not powerful political people, are there things to learn? Do you wonder how the filmmaker made the choices for the animated film? If you do, if the film intrigues you and you find yourself comparing the film and the book, you might want to write on that. You will have 3 choices to choose from. Do any symbols in the text strike you? Does the allegory get your attention? Do you like looking at how the allegory works, how these symbols fit together and make a story on the page in the form of the animals, but also reflect this other, the Soviet communist situation and Stalin? So for paper number 2, you will be invited to do some of those things. So you should start thinking about those, and you can review with this if you like. Remember, I encouraged you to take note of evidence, and some is in this presentation that you might want to use. So thank you.